Warning, censorship. Warning, censorship. Warning, censorship.
And I read this essay in American Greatness, and I just want to read a lot of it to you now. It's by Peter Dabroska. He wrote it. You can find it online. I'm just going to read a chunk of it to you, not out of laziness, but out of recognition that he really phrased it in a way that I don't think I can meaningfully improve upon. Call the COVID hysteria what it is. There's a reason why you might be noticing the tactics and effects of psychological torture in your everyday life. I'm going to read this to you. Do you know what one of the most common psychological torture tactics is? Isolation. Other common tactics of psychological torture, according to the Center for the Study of Human Rights in the Americas at the University of California, Davis, include indefinite detention and a sense of futility. Threats of death are also a common tactic psychological torturers use. So is degradation and sensory deprivation. Torture is defined as the deliberate, systematic, or wanton infliction of physical or mental suffering by one or more persons acting alone or on the orders of any authority to force another person to yield information, to make a confession, or for any other reason. Medical professionals make no definitional distinction between psychological and physical torture. Do any of the above tactics of psychological torture sound familiar? They should. Your government leaders, at the direction of Dr. Anthony Fauci and the U.S. Centers for Disease Control, have been inflicting them upon you for almost 18 months. Obviously, it's the same thing in Canada. Lockdowns are the obvious example of isolation, but subtler is the suggestion, which is once again becoming a major talking point among our public health and elected officials, that if you do dare to leave your house, standing close to another human being or gathering in groups could be dangerous, even deadly. I think that's so true, don't you? I think this is a giant game of psychological manipulation. I think that if you didn't watch the media and if you didn't listen to experts, you probably wouldn't even know there was a pandemic going on. In fact, if you didn't know someone in a euthanasia risky long-term care home, if your life wasn't spent with people in their 80s and 90s, you probably wouldn't have even known about the pandemic at all, other than the fact that it was on TV and there were government lockdowns. I'm going to read some more. Are you feeling a sense of futility yet? If you've refused the vaccine, you might be. How many times can you explain to the brainwashed masses that you have good reason to avoid taking an experimental drug? How long will the hysteria last? How can these mindless leftists possibly continue blindly to follow the immoral authority of the CDC and somehow have the audacity to label themselves intellectuals? Will we ever return to pre-COVID norms, where a virus didn't dominate our daily lives? You might also feel a sense of futility if your employer, at the behest of your government torturers, is coercing you into taking the vaccine under threat of unemployment. The threat of losing your livelihood is in itself part of the torture. They're hoping that the idea of financial ruin will break you and that you'll finally give in to their demands. On the topic of degradation, what could possibly be more degrading than becoming a guinea pig for an experimental drug? Bear in mind that such drugs are normally tested on lab rats. Now they're being tested on you. Masks are an obvious form of degradation too. Being forced to wear a dirty cloth diaper over your face for months on end sounds like a fraternity hazing ritual, only it wasn't. It was the official policy mandated by nearly every U.S. governor at the behest of the CDC. Now it's the official recommendation. I've read a lot from this essay. I just didn't think of it that way, or maybe I did, but he put it into words. On the topic of masks, I've called masks the flag of lockdownism, the ideology, the philosophy. Wearing that flag, that mask, it's a sign that not only have you surrendered to the powers that be, and not only that you submit, but that you will fly their flag. You will help keep people in a state of agitation and fear. And in so doing, you will help enforce it, even if you don't really mean to. You'll just keep reminding everyone else we're in a crisis. That your mask, at the very least, is a moral condemnation of those who don't wear one. And it'll actually help in the peer pressure to crush anyone and marginalize anyone who doesn't wear one. Okay, I'm going to read you just one last excerpt. And what about threats of death? Have you heard more than a few people over the past 18 months tell you that if you don't follow the infallible word of Fauci, that you'll die? Or worse, that you'll cause the death of someone you love? Of course you have. That messaging is ubiquitous. I think he's talking about the worst part of this lockdown. I've mentioned it before, how we treat each other, how we look at each other, how shopkeepers treat customers, how we treat each other on the street now. The mask isn't just bad for the obvious reasons. It gives us a sense of anonymity so we can behave more poorly in person than we normally do. Normally, the worst behavior comes out online when people are anonymous because you don't have to face someone down. But imagine being face-to-face in a store and shrieking at someone, "Put on your mask!" If you're wearing a mask, you're half hidden. And maybe that gives you a boldness because you're removed from the immediate social consequences of your misconduct. Remember, the lockdown itself is a medical experiment. The lockdown was prescribed by public health doctors, but never before have the healthy been locked down, never in history. It was a word reserved for prison riots. The prison's in a lockdown. Never before were innocent people treated as criminals, house arrest. Never before were families told they couldn't meet, console each other at a funeral, couldn't meet even if grandpa was dying. This is all new. This is all experimental, and it's also obviously directed by the World Health Organization. We know that because we're told that because they say that, both by obedient repeaters like Theresa Tam, who actually worked for the World Health Organization for the first half of the pandemic, and also by vicious censors like Facebook and YouTube, who explicitly say in their terms of service that if you dispute the World Health Organization, you will be suspended. They say that. They've deleted elected officials from Derek Sloan in Canada to the president of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro. But of course they did. They deleted the sitting president of the United States, Donald Trump. So it's the details, sure. But pull the camera back, get a wider view. It's the entire socialization of the entire population to think of themselves as prisoners, or at least as subjects, not citizens. Permanent, perpetual obedience, obey politicians and, until now, anonymous health bureaucrats that no one ever heard of. Few, if any, of these lockdown rules have been debated, let alone voted on. Vaccine passports aren't being voted on, but they're here now. Our entire society has been rewired. Everything is being changed. And it started and continues with rewiring you and how you think and how you feel even about yourself. We've all been brainwashed in a way, haven't we? And if you say, no, you haven't. Well, look at your life. And if you think that, maybe you're so far gone, you're numb to it. Maybe you don't even notice it anymore. That's an excerpt from my daily show, The Ezra Levant Show. Every day I do a monologue on the news of the day, then I interview an interesting guest, and then I read my hate mail. You gotta subscribe. Go to rebelnews.com.